Welcome to General Welfare Presents. This is Paul Glumaz, and I've been an active political individual with the movement of Lyndon LaRouche for 44 years. I'm getting older. I don't know if I'm getting wiser, but I'm certainly getting older. Now, today is the 24th of April, and we have some very, very interesting developments occurring. The world political situation is starting to take a certain definition, following the almost serious, but still serious, attack on Syria that the French, the United States, and the British did on the basis of a fake, provably fake, staged, alleged chemical incident in Syria. Now, what's happened is that the proof that this is fake is now fully exposed. Some of the children that were in the video, who were like being treated for chemical exposure, were not, and they're now talking. And some of the people that were there are also talking that there was no chemical attack. And so essentially, the British have been caught, and the Russians are now claiming that it was organized at the behest of the British government. The Al-Qaeda linked White Helmet staged the whole thing. And we have entered a situation of incredible crisis because the imperial system is being exposed for having concocted a fraud, not the first fraud. I mean, the W&D in Iraq was one, and there's many other frauds, but they've been caught. And this time, the Russians and the Chinese are not going to let them off the hook. They're going to pursue this thing all the way. Now, you have to understand that when I say the British Empire, it is the British Empire. It's not the U.S. Empire. A lot of people are confused about that. And the Russians are making it also very clear, and as are the Chinese are making it very clear, that for the first time, they are making it very clear, it's not the American Empire, it's the British Empire. And they're basically saying that it's the British who are organizing this whole thing. And what is it that the British are organizing? Well, they're organizing all of the nations possible to form a coalition to go to war with Russia and China. That's what they're doing. The U.S. isn't organizing a coalition of forces to go to war with Russia and China. It's the British which are organizing a coalition of forces to go, nations to go to war with China and Russia. And they're getting excellent support and co-leadership from Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. And why? Because the French elites, the British elites, the creme de la creme of the world's elites are continuation of the old European colonial system, which has been metastasized into a modern neo-colonial system, but it's the same families, it's the same actors, it's the same people. Now, how are they able to do this? Well, the principal reason they were able to expand and extend something that should have died a long time ago is through criminal activity. Criminal activity. And what form does this criminal activity take? Well, the first part of the criminal activity, which has been growing over the last 50 years, is the creation of crown properties in islands in the Caribbean and other places, which are outside of the legal framework of nations, where offshore financial accounts can be set up, which are called tax havens, meaning that you can set up your companies there and conduct business from there and not pay taxes. You can also send your money offshore and there's no record of where it is, and so on and so forth. These are tax havens. No government can get at them, not even the British government can get at them, because they're not subject to the government, any government. They're subject to the British monarchy itself, above and beyond government. Now, in these islands and in these tax havens and various other tax havens associated with them, there's somewhere between 35 to 50 trillion dollars worth of assets, worth of deposits. And a good 50% or more of the world's actual financial transactions go through these offshore tax havens. And the nerve center of all the tax havens is a 1 square mile within the City of London, which is called the City of London. It is not the London, the metropolis, it is the City of London. And the City of London has its own crown-appointed Lord Mayor of the City of London. And this is where the world's financial center is, that behind all of this. So all this criminal activity is going on, like what? The drug trade. Yes, all of the funds from the drug trade, or most of the funds from the drug trade, from everywhere in the world, find their way into these offshore tax havens and into the under the direction of George Soros's profound largesse to finance color revolutions and every assorted NGOs, and the massive growth of NGOs, of which George Soros is one of the principal sponsors. What are non-governmental organizations? They are not governmental organizations. That's what non-governmental organizations are. Who do they own their allegiance? Well, whoever gives them the money. Who gives them the money? The offshore financial system gives. So you have non-governmental organizations setting themselves up as referees over governments. Non-governmental organizations want to oversee your election process to see if you're doing it right, and if they don't like your government, well, then they say you committed fraud or whatever, whether you committed fraud or not. So non-governmental organizations have been growing by leaps and bounds, invading all kinds of governments, including our own country. Non-government organizations are doing the same, like Amnesty International as an example, and there's many others. And they all have, a lot of them have Transparency International, but there's all kinds of them, especially in other countries. And a lot of countries have had a lot of problems with these non-governmental. A lot of them are environmentalist non-government organizations. And whenever there's a dam about to be built in a third world country, they show up in mass, and they have money, and where did the money come from, and so on and so forth. So that's one example of where all this money goes in terms of political and other activity. But then there's another place where all this money goes. And this has been growing since the Afghan War, Afghan-Soviet War. And this is the growth of international mercenaries. Who are the Al-Qaeda? Who are the jihadis? Who are all these people? Who are the Tamil Tigers? Who are the Uyghurs? The Al-Qaeda that's being developed among the Uyghurs in Western China. Who are these people? They're financed. Where are they getting all this money? Look, after everything that's happened in Syria, ISIS is coming back. So is all the other. Where's they getting their money? Where are they getting their supplies? Well, it's from this offshore system under the direction of the City of London, which integrates all the criminal activity in the world. Most of the criminal activity in the world ends up in these. So the drug trade goes into Russia, it goes in everywhere. And Afghanistan is a very important place because this is where the drugs come from. A lot of the heroin comes from. But they get routed through Albania. So you start to get a picture of a world of non-governmental organizations where no government has sovereignty, operating off a financial system where no government has sovereignty. And this system, right, is the empire. And it has already purchased most of your senators, most of your congressmen, most of the government officials have been going in and out of it. For instance, I'll give you an example. Adam Smith's chief of staff, when we were explaining that the Saudis were financing 9/11 terrorists, the chief of staff got pissed off at us and said, you know, everyone knows the Saudis finance 9/11. Okay? Like, where have you been, Turkey? And this is the congressman's chief of staff. And it was Adam Smith, our congressman here in Washington State, who went to bat to defend the Saudis. So here is a so-called patriotic congressman who is who never met a war that the U.S. should never have fought in, and who was, along with John McCain and Joe Lieberman and Lindsey Graham, has been a champion of military intervention. This congressman of ours, his chief of staff says everybody knows, well, everybody that should know knows, right? So we had 3,000 people die in the World Trade Center, and they know that the Saudis financed it, and yet they're our congressmen, and they're protecting the Saudis. Now, what kind of people are these kind of people? Well, they're the people that say, well, we have a system, we have a neoliberal system, we cannot allow the Middle East to become stable, because then the Middle East will develop, and then they will become a powerful place. Or they will work with Russia and China, or they will work with Europe, and you have stability in the world. You don't want stability in the world, because that's, and besides, the greater there's instability, the less you have investments in these areas which are unstable. So where do people put their money? They put their money in the offshore financial system. That's the empire. That's how it works. However, something has happened. China creates its own money and is deploying this money to massively develop China. And now they're involved in massively developing the planet through the Belt and Road. And they're also being supported by Russia in this. And there will be a major conference of countries in what is called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization coming up in Beijing. I believe it's in early June. But already there's preliminary meetings. Now, the issue is whether India will work with China in the Belt and Road. This is a huge issue. The same British propagandists in the United States who've been pushing the Russia gate to stop Trump from having a dialogue with Putin is the same crowd pushing that China is the enemy in India. Massively pushing the China's the enemy. They almost came to a war last year. So the issue is, will the British succeed in getting India to go against the Belt and Road? And so Prime Minister Modi of India will be having an informal meeting with President Xi Jinping in Wuhan, and I believe in a week or two, within the week. And this is very important. I mean, it might be later on, I don't know. But the point is that the issue of India and China coming together as the two most continuous, oldest civilizations on the planet, each with together combined, they have close to 3 billion people, which is about 40% of the world's population. And this is what you need to have. And then all you got to do is have Trump come in as a dialogue partner, and with Russia, and you have essentially the four powers on the planet, the most powerful countries on the planet, beginning to decide what is in the interest of the nation, of each nation, not what's in the interest of the British Crown, the offshore financial system, the British, French, European oligarchy, and the people they control in the U.S., and the media they control in the U.S., and the companies they control in the U.S., and the corporations, etc. We have the potential, we are on the edge of having that kind of situation where decisions for the world are not being made in London, are not being made because the financial system of 35 to $50 trillion of power in that system, which is controlling the world. So this is a huge, huge situation, and it's coming to a head. Now the British are now organizing all these countries to go against the Belt and Road and Russia and China. Will Japan join that coalition? It doesn't look like it. It looks like Japan wants out of the coalition. Now, we just had a meeting of the Group of Seven in none other than Ottawa, because Canada is now the rotating head of the Group of Seven. And the Foreign Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, whose grandfather was a close collaborator of the Nazis in Ukraine in exterminating the Jews, the Poles, and Hungarians and others, she has organized within the G7 a Russia group whose sole purpose is to mobilize the G7 to go against Russia. This is after the whole fake thing. Now, is Japan, which is a member of the G7, going to go along with that? I don't think so, because the Japanese are not Europeans, and although they have had imperial ambitions and still have harbor a certain amount of problems from that, they nonetheless can see that Asia is going to go with the Belt and Road, and their future lies in Asia. And our future, the future of the United States, lies in the Pacific, because the Pacific is connected to Asia. And we have a future in that. The whole world has a future in that. But the whole point is that, so this is all coming together. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is also coming together, because the terrorism thing isn't going to go away just because they might have defeated it in Syria, which they haven't done completely. It's all over the world. It's in the Philippines. It's all over Africa. It's in India. It's in Russia. It's in the Caucasus. It's in Western China, and it's going to spread, because who are these terrorists? They're mercenaries. That's that simple. It's not a religious thing. It's a mercenary thing. And what they do is they recruit from the dregs of society, from the population which has been most destroyed, most devastated by poverty. And they go in and they find these young men who are desperate and angry, and they recruit them to this. They become mercenaries. They become killers. And we saw this in the Middle Ages in Europe, where you had the Crusaders who were these kind of people. They weren't religious. They were mass murderers. You know, they went into Jerusalem and killed every person in Jerusalem. You know? And who were they? They were mercenaries. And in the old days, in the feudal times, in the medieval times, or even more recently, even up to recently, in that society, you were a peasant. You had no escape. Except you could go 3 ways to escape. You could get into the priesthood. You could get into the mercenary forces, or you could become an outlaw. Those were the only avenues of escape. It's the same thing today in a lot of places. Where's the escape? How do you escape from this horrifying poverty? What you do is you come along, and you have relative to anything you've seen before, you have stupendous amounts of funds being created and a lot of support for your family while you're doing this. This is what this is all about. It's a non-national, international mercenary army being deployed against all sovereign nations. And the idea was that once they took over Syria, and then they established what they call the caliphate, then they would have the cover for expanding this all over the world. This is the real face of the world order that the French, the British, and the German Prime Minister are trying to get Trump to not end supporting. In other words, they're here to say to Trump, you have to stay in Syria because of Iran or because of this or because of that. You have to keep the pot boiling. You have to keep committing American blood for all of this. You can't just do what the people want you to do, which is to end all these adventures and concentrate on the national development, and work with Russia and China. You can't do that. It's our system. You can't do that. You must help. You must not do that. And that's what all of Washington is going nuts about. Because when if Trump makes good on this promise, then they don't have the United States anymore as their primary military enforcer. And without the U.S. as a primary military enforcer to go along with the mercenary armies that the United States has helped to create and has been supporting all along, not openly, but been supporting them all along, then it's going to be a lot harder to destroy all these nations. It's going to be a lot harder to destroy the Belt and Road. It's going to be a lot harder to drown the world back into a dark ages kind of situation, which is what this oligarchy wants. They don't want progress. They don't want development. They want to maintain their power over mankind. And so they're freaking out. And we had a very interesting situation relative to this. There was the nomination process going on in the Senate Foreign Intelligence Committee. I mean, the Senate Foreign Policy Committee. And Rand Paul was the key Republican holding up the nomination, and then Trump talked to him, and then he also talked to Pompeo, and they promised Rand Paul that Trump is committed to getting us out of all these wars, and even though Pompeo is a hawk, Pompeo said that he would follow the president's policies, and Trump made it very clear that he is in charge of foreign policy, not Pompeo. So that's an interesting revelation by Rand Paul. What that means, I don't know. And then we come to the Korean situation. This is huge. That thing is about to get resolved. Okay, Moon and Kim Jong-un are meeting, and the Russians are working on it. The Japanese seem to be favorable. China seems to be favorable to ending this whole thing and beginning the process of integrating North Korea into the whole economic development of the region, which is another aspect of the Belt and Road. And Donald Trump has, for all intents and purposes, at this point, put his political capital on the line for a successful, change. And that change, of course, will lead to North Korea giving up its nuclear capabilities, because they won't need them anymore. They won't need them. Why are they having them in the first place? Because they're afraid they're going to get attacked. But now what you got to watch out for is another false flag. This time possibly a ship in the Pacific, and they blame it on North Korea, and then they do the bum rush like they did with the fake chemical attack in Syria, and then all of a sudden the U.S. is bombing North Korea. That is exactly what I'm sure is about to occur. That's the plan. That's what the British are going to do. And it's the same old method. It's the same old game. They haven't changed. And this is what you can expect. You can expect a false flag attack on some U.S. military, blame it on Korea, on a ship or something like that. You can pretty much guarantee that that's the kind of thing that they're going to try to do. So, and even the Russians are saying that that's what we'll most likely do. Why? Because that is the kind of operation that has been run before, again and again and again and again. So we can expect that kind of thing to occur. But if the North Korea thing does go forward and Trump does meet with Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un will have no problem fulfilling the promises, then Trump will be seen. Then you can't attack Trump as an incompetent if he got the job done. But that's the job that no one wanted him to do anyhow. The whole point is they didn't want him to do that, but but if he does it, it will further consolidate his political position with the American people, and that's exactly what they don't want. So this is a very complicated, but it's a very dangerous situation. So this is what we're dealing with, okay? But we are at a turning point, and we have a new paradigm emerging, and it's really beautiful. Humanity, for the first time, has hope in the future, and the hope hinges largely on whether we can recruit the United States into the new paradigm, which is feasible. But on the other hand, if we don't, and Trump commits to backing up the old neo-colonial system, then we are headed towards a world war. And that's the whole point of the situation right now. But these lines are now taking shape. It's 28 foreign ministers met in Europe of the European Union. 27 signed on to a resolution being very critical of the Belt and Road. So this is coming to an end, because the Belt and Road is the end of this offshore financial system, because people aren't going to want to put their money in the offshore financial system if they have real economic development. They want to put it in the economy. And plus you have public credit being created that is actually going to development. It doesn't get siphoned off the way the Federal Reserve money. The money created by the Federal Reserve all goes offshore or goes in here, it goes there, but it doesn't go in the real economy. So we are entering that period of our history, whether a decisive moment in our history. Are we going to work with the Asian nations and Russia, and hopefully India comes in, and then we will have a better world.